Look, this has been a very big political issue in Australia in the past month, particularly leading up to our federal election, which was just on last weekend. The Labor Party that is now in government blamed the former Morrison government for not doing enough on climate change, which you just raised then, and not doing enough in terms of aid funding, giving enough to the Pacific Island nations to stop China's engagement and investment and the security deals and setting up future military bases in these places. Is this Australia's fault, do you think?
Not at all. What are we going to do? Are we going to out-China the Chinese? Are we going to, double down on their bribes? These are sovereign nations. These are, they can do what they want, even though they know there are multiple examples of how this goes badly. Pakistan's probably my favorite with the China-Pakistan economic corridor. There's lots of stories from Africa and otherwise that, the Chinese are nothing if not predictable. You'll see this same process executing almost the exact same way every time.
So how do we counter it? How does the United States, Australia, the UK, Japan, India, how do we counter this sort of financial influence, these sort of bribes?
As I said before, once you expose them and you show that leaders who are elected, and most of these countries are democratic, once these leaders are shown that they're elected leaders showing that they prefer themselves and their own benefit over their people's, they are bounced out of office fairly quickly. And again, Malaysia is an example. There are others. Yeah. So transparency.
What is China's endgame in the Pacific? Why is it set on signing these 10 or even a dozen security deals?
Well, and Jim Fennell mentioned this before, that they've laid this out in their Belt Road strategy, that they have all these lines of communication they're trying to protect, South China Sea being their primary, but this is a secondary area of concern. They're also going after places where U.S. And Australian and allies relations are maybe tentative, and when they see weakness, where they see the possible opportunity to drive wedges between relationships, they do that quite well. This is part of their concept of winning without fighting, is you create angst and friction between partners. Yes. And when they're done, fighting, you walk in.
And is the next phase in this Pacific, is it military expansion? Is this what Xi Jinping hopes to do, set up military bases in places like the Solomon Islands so close to Australia?
I hope he does. I think that's great, because those are military assets that are no longer in the South China Sea or the East China Sea directly.
Not great for Australia, though, too close to us.
I don't see Chinese military assets coming after Australia. I see them falling back in defense of their own lands, of Taiwan particularly, or the South China Sea. So, this is strategic overextension. This is overreach. This is, look at the amount of bribes, money, investment they've got globally. And then you look at the debt situation inside China, and you can't do all of those things at once. I think you're going to see a rapid retrenchment of at least Chinese investment, real estate investment everywhere. We're already starting to see it here in Hawaii and elsewhere, that they got to get liquid so they can pay debts back home. Again, I think in 2015 we saw peak China. We're now watching it actually happen.
Okay, just back to climate change, a point you raised just a moment ago. The Pacific Island leaders say that they want Australia to take more action on climate change, and this is kind of bandied about as a reason or as an excuse that deals are being signed with China, or that there's more engagement with China. But as you point out, China is one of the world's largest carbon emitters. So is this a nonsense argument?
Well, it is, but it doesn't have to be a rational argument. It's just simply throwing stuff at a wall and see what sticks, right? And they know that the folks in the West are very conscious of our reputation. We like to be seen as treated people fairly, which we do. And if you look at what our countries have done as far as reducing emissions and aligning with our commitments to the climate. I live in Hawaii. I live about 6 feet above sea level. I care deeply about making sure this doesn't get worse. And I know a lot of people do. You look at words and actions, and this is where, again, we have it all over Beijing, is, let's look at the Solomon Islands Agreement. we talked about climate. Let's talk about other agreements. In the Solomon Islands, China committed to preserving the Solomon Islands' sovereignty and territorial integrity. That happened with Ukraine too in 2011 and 2013. And yet when push came to shove, did China live up to its agreement to protect Ukraine sovereignty and territorial integrity? No, it did not. And so again, we put the Chinese actions on climate against the words, yes, and let the facts speak for themselves.
Look, before you'd go, David Stilwell, I'd love your quick take on US politics. You obviously worked very closely with Mike Pompeo when you were Assistant Secretary of State and he was Secretary of State. Do you think he would make a good presidential candidate, or do you expect Donald Trump will run again?
35 years in the military makes me the worst possible person to ask that question. I mean, I'm serious. The military has always taken a vow of non-partisanship. You can't have a partisan military. I will tell you that Mike Pompeo was a fantastic leader. I loved working for the guy. He was clear. He loved to delegate, right? Tell you to do this and then come back to me if you need help. And he gave us a lot of latitude to get a lot of stuff done. I think he would make a great president. But there are a number of other candidates that would do just as well. It's the clear vision and the ability to execute is what you need as the leader of the free world.
Yeah. David Stilwell, I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you. It was great.